Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video we will be looking at explanations of forgetting, which you need to know for AQA A-level psychology in the subtopic of memory. I hope you enjoy this video and find it helpful. Let's get started. Forgetting is a person's inability to recall or recognize something that they have previously learnt. There are two types of forgetting: interference theory and retrieval failure. Interference theory. Interference theory suggests that forgetting occurs when two memories conflict, compete, interfere with and disrupt each other, resulting in a forgetting of one or both memories or a distortion or confusion in memory. It is more likely when the information is similar, response competition. This makes a memory harder to locate even if it is available. Retroactive interference is when new, recently learnt information interferes with and disrupts the recall of previously learnt information. For example, when you learn your new mobile phone number but are unable to remember your old one, when a teacher learns all the names of their new class that they forget the names of their old class. McGeoch and McDonald's, 1931, aimed to investigate the effects of retroactive interference on memory recall. Specifically, they wanted to see how learning new information that is similar or dissimilar to previously learnt information would affect a person's ability to recall the original information. All participants were asked to learn a list of 10 words, List A, until they could remember them all. After learning List A, participants were divided into 6 different groups. Each group was then given a second list to learn, List B. The second list varied in similarity to the first list. Group 1. List B was synonyms of List A, words with the same meaning as the original words. Group 2. List B was antonyms of List A, words with the opposite meaning as the original words. Group 3. List B was nonsense syllables. Group 4. List B was numbers. Group 5. List B was unrelated words. Group 6. No new list. After learning both lists, participants were asked to recall the words from List A. They found that the groups that learnt a second similar list to the first, e.g. synonyms, showed the greatest amount of interference and had the poorest recall of List A. Conversely, the groups that learned dissimilar or unrelated lists, e.g. numbers or unrelated words, experienced less interference and had better recall of List A. A strength of the McGeoch and McDonald study is that there is research to support the findings and conclusions. Postman, 1960, aimed to investigate how retroactive interference affects learning. He conducted a laboratory experiment where participants were split into 2 groups. Both groups had to remember a list of paired words, e.g. cat, tree, jelly, moss, book, tractor. The experimental group also had to learn another list of words where the second paired word, if different, e.g. cat, glass, jelly, time, book, revolver. The control group was not given the second list. All participants were asked to recall the words on the first list. He found that recall of the control group was more accurate than that of the experimental group. He concluded that learning items in the second list interfered with participants' ability to recall the list. This is a strength because it suggests that retroactive interference is a significant factor in memory recall, indicating that new information can disrupt the retrieval of previously learnt material. A strength of the McGeoch and McDonald study is that it is replicable, meaning that other researchers can repeat the experiment to see if they achieve similar results. This is important for establishing reliability in psychological research. The study used a controlled experimental design, which allows for consistent procedures and conditions to be followed. By using the same methods, including the same types of materials and instructions, researchers can verify the findings and strengthen the validity of the conclusions drawn from the original study. Replicability also contributes to the overall body of knowledge in psychology, as successful replications can confirm theories or highlight potential limitations and variables that may have been overlooked initially. This is a strength because it suggests that the findings of McGeoch and McDonald study are not just one-off results but can be consistently observed across different contexts and samples. A strength of McGeoch and McDonald's study is that it has high control over extraneous variables, which enhances the internal validity of the research. By carefully controlling the experimental conditions, the researchers minimized the influence of outside factors that could affect the results. For instance, they standardized the instructions given to participants and ensured that all participants were tested in similar environments, reducing variability that could arise from different settings or distractions. This control allows researchers to attribute any observed effects directly to the manipulations of the independent variable, which in this case is the type of interference introduced. High control over extraneous variables also makes it easier to replicate the study, as other researchers can follow the same controlled conditions to verify the findings. This is a strength because it suggests that the researchers were able to isolate the effects of interference on memory recall effectively. A limitation of McGeoch and MacDonald's study is that it lacks mundane realism. The task of learning lists of words in a controlled environment is an artificial task, which is a task that people don't typically encounter in their everyday lives and does not mimic how people typically recall information in their everyday lives. The consequences of remembering these words is not important compared to the consequences that a person could face if they didn't remember a piece of information in their day-to-day lives, as people are usually tasked with remembering more meaningful and contextually relevant information, e.g. medical or health information, emergency procedures, paying the bills, people's addresses or names, deadlines for work or education. To add to this, Baddeley, 1990, stated that the tasks given to the participants are too close to each other and, in real life, these kinds of events are more spaced out. Laboratory experiments are designed to maximize the possibility of interference. For practical reasons, the time between learning and recalling the list of words is relatively short. The whole experience of learning and recalling should be around an hour long. This is a limitation because it suggests that the findings of the study may not accurately reflect how memory functions in everyday situations and limits the generalizability and application of the results. A limitation of McGeoch and MacDonald's study is that it lacks ecological validity, which refers to the extent to which the findings can be generalized to real-world settings. The study was conducted in a controlled environment, which is not like the environment in everyday life. McGeoch and MacDonald's study was conducted in a controlled laboratory setting, which doesn't mirror the complexities and nuances of memory and remembering in natural environments, where other external and environmental factors can affect a person's ability to recall and remember information. This is a limitation because it suggests that the results may not be applicable to real-life situations where memory is influenced by various factors, such as emotional context, distractions, or social interactions. The artificial nature of the laboratory setting may lead to an oversimplified understanding of how memory works in everyday life, ultimately questioning the reliability of the study's conclusions in reflecting actual memory processes. Proactive interference is when previously learnt information interferes with and disrupts the recall of new, recently learnt information. For example, when an old mobile phone number is recalled when trying to recall the new mobile phone number, when a teacher has learnt so many names in the past they struggle to remember the names of their new class. Keppel and Underwood's, 1962, aimed to investigate proactive interference in the long-term memory in an experiment that resembled Peterson and Peterson, 1959. Participants were asked to memorize multiple lists of consonant trigrams, three-letter combinations, like XQJ or BKT, after varying time intervals, e.g. 3, 6, 9 seconds. To prevent rehearsal, participants had to count backwards in threes before recalling. They found that participants' ability to recall trigrams decreased as they were presented with more lists. Specifically, the first list learnt was recalled with high accuracy, irrespective of the time interval length, but recall performance declined for subsequent lists. The decline in recall was attributed to proactive interference. This means that the trigrams learnt in earlier lists interfered with the ability to remember the trigrams in later lists. They concluded that proactive interference could significantly impact short-term memory. Even with short retention intervals, previously learnt information can disrupt the recall of new information. A strength of Keppel and Underwood's study is that study has high control over extraneous variables. The researchers employed a standardized procedure, ensuring that all participants were subjected to the same conditions during the experiment. For instance, they used a fixed duration for the retention interval and a consistent method for presenting stimuli, which minimizes the influence of outside factors that could affect memory performance. By controlling these variables, the study was able to more accurately attribute any observed effects on memory recall to the manipulated independent variable, rather than to fluctuations in participant behavior or environmental conditions. This is a strength because it suggests that the findings of the study are more credible and can be generalized to a wider population, as the high control over extraneous variables means that the results are less likely to be influenced by external factors, which enhances the confidence in the conclusions drawn about memory processes. A strength of Keppel and Underwood's study is that it can be easily replicated, which is crucial for verifying the reliability of research findings. The standardized procedures used in the study, including the specific tasks, timing, and instructions, allow other researchers to follow the same methodology. This means that different teams can conduct the experiment under similar conditions to see if they achieve the same results. Replication helps to confirm the original findings and strengthens the evidence for the conclusions drawn about short-term memory. If multiple studies yield consistent results, it increases confidence in the validity of the theory being tested. This is a strength because it suggests that the findings can be trusted and are not just a one-time occurrence. A limitation of Keppel and Underwood's study is that the study lacks mundane realism. The study's use of trigrams, nonsense syllables, may not accurately represent how memory functions in real-world scenarios, as it is an artificial task, unlike memory recall in real-world settings, where information is often more meaningful and complex, such as names, events, or experiences, rather than random strings of letters. This is a limitation because it suggests that the conclusions drawn from the study may not be applicable to how memory works in everyday life. A limitation of Keppel and Underwood's study is that it lacks ecological validity, meaning that the findings may not be applicable to real-world situations. The study was conducted in a controlled laboratory environment where participants were asked to memorize trigrams and then perform a distraction task. This artificial setting does not reflect how memory is used in everyday life, where people often remember more complex information and are influenced by various external factors. In real-life scenarios, memory tasks are usually more meaningful and context-rich, which can enhance recall. This is a limitation because it suggests that the results found may not be able to be generalized to the wider population as the study's conditions are so far removed from typical memory tasks and therefore the study may not accurately reflect how memory operates in everyday situations. Interference theory has several strengths and limitations. A strength of the interference theory as an explanation of forgetting is that there is real-world research to support the theory. Baddeley and Hitch, 1977, aimed to investigate whether interference was a better explanation for forgetting than the passage of time. They asked rugby union players to recall all the names of the teams they had played against earlier in the season each week. Some of the rugby union players had missed some games due to injury. Baddeley and Hitch found that players who had played the most games forgot proportionately more games than those who had played fewer games due to injury. These results support the idea of interference theory, as the learning of new information, new team names, interfered with the memory of old information, earlier team names, as recall didn't depend on how long ago the games took place but the number of games they had played. This is a strength because it suggests that interference theory has practical implications for understanding memory in real-life situations, rather than just in controlled laboratory settings. A limitation of the interference theory as an explanation of forgetting is that it offers a limited explanation of forgetting. The theory primarily explains forgetting in terms of similar information interfering with each other. For example, Baddeley and Hitch study demonstrated retroactive interference in rugby union players trying to recall team names from earlier in the season, showing that new, similar information can interfere with the recall of old information. This research highlights the theory's focus on similar information. However, it fails to explain forgetting in other situations where the information is not similar. This makes the theory somewhat limited in its scope. This is a limitation because it suggests that the interference theory doesn't provide a comprehensive explanation for all types of forgetting. It mainly focuses on memory for similar information and doesn't account for forgetting in situations where the information isn't similar. This means it doesn't fully explain how different kinds of information are forgotten, limiting its overall applicability. Retrieval failure. Retrieval failure, also known as cue-dependent forgetting, suggests that forgetting occurs because information is available in LTM but not accessible due to insufficient and the absence of appropriate cues, clues, prompts and triggers. Tulving and Thompson, 1973, proposed the encoding specificity principle, ESP. Memory is most effective when information that was present at the time of encoding, when something is learnt, is also present at the time of retrieval, when something is recalled. If the cues available at encoding and recall are different or even absent, there will be some forgetting. They suggested that environmental and mental cues aid recall. Cues can be linked to the material and remembered in a meaningful way, e.g. mnemonics, or encoded at the time of learning but not in a meaningful way, e.g. context-dependent forgetting and state-dependent forgetting. Context, external, dependent forgetting is where the environment for learning and recall is different, e.g. room, smell, place, temperature. Memory is best when the context at encoding is similar to the context at retrieval. Godden and Baddeley, 1975, aimed to investigate how the environmental context affects recall using deep-sea divers. Divers were tasked with learning and recalling in 4 different contexts. 1. Learning on land and recalling on land. 2. Learning on land and recalling underwater. 3. Learning underwater and recalling underwater. And 4. Learning underwater and recalling on land. They found that the divers recalled 40% more words when the learning and recall contexts were the same, land or underwater, compared to when they were different, land underwater or underwater land. They concluded that the retrieval of information is improved if it occurs in the context in which it was learnt. A strength of Godden and Baddeley's study is that the study has been supported by previous research. Abernethy, 1940, found that after participants had learnt various material, they showed greater difficulty with recall when they were tested by an unfamiliar teacher in an unfamiliar room compared to a familiar teacher and familiar room. This is a strength because it suggests that the context in which information is learnt can significantly impact memory recall. A limitation of Godden and Baddeley's study is that it lacks mundane realism. The task of learning and recalling a list of words underwater and on land is an artificial task, which is a task that people don't typically encounter in their everyday lives and does not mimic how people typically recall information in their everyday lives. The consequences of remembering these words is not important compared to the consequences that a person could face if they didn't remember a piece of information in their day-to-day lives, as people are usually tasked with remembering more meaningful and contextually relevant information, e.g. medical or health information, emergency procedures, paying the bills, people's addresses or names, deadlines for work or education. This is a limitation because it suggests that the findings of Godden and Baddeley may not be applicable or generalized to real-life situations. A limitation of Godden and Baddeley's study is that there is research to suggest that the presence-absence of cues only affects memory when tested in a certain way. Godden and Baddeley, 1980, replicated their underwater study with a recognition test instead of a recall test. There was no context-dependent effect and performance was the same in all 4 conditions. The test didn't require any recall. This is a limitation because it suggests that the effectiveness of context cues in memory retrieval may depend on the type of test used. State, internal, dependent forgetting is where the physical or emotional state of arousal for learning and recall is different, e.g. mood, nervous, happy, sad, intoxication, drunk or on drugs. Memory will be best when a person's physical or psychological state is similar to encoding and retrieval. Memory is also better when a person is in a positive mood rather than a negative mood and when a person tries to remember an event that has a personal relevance. Carter and Cassidy, 1998, aimed to investigate state-dependent forgetting with a focus on the effects of drug-induced states on memory. Their study specifically examined the impact of antihistamine drugs, for treating hay fever, on memory retrieval. Participants were given either an antihistamine drug or a placebo and were asked to learn a list of words in one of 4 conditions: drug-drug, drug-placebo, placebo-drug, and placebo-placebo, and therefore learnt and recalled the words under the same state, both times on the drug or both times on the placebo, or different states, learned on the drug and recalled on the placebo, or vice versa. The drugs had a mild sedative effect, making the participants drowsy. They found that participants who learned and recalled the words in the same state, either drug-drug or placebo-placebo, had better recall than those who learned and recalled in different states, drug-placebo or placebo-drug. They concluded that recall is enhanced when the learning and retrieval states are congruent, whether under the influence of a drug or a placebo. A strength of Carter and Cassaday's study is that there is research to support their findings and conclusions. Daly et al., 1973, observed that participants who forgot where they hid money while high on cannabis were more likely to remember where they hid that money once they got high again compared to when they were sober. Overton, 1972, conducted a study where participants learnt materials either drunk or sober and found participants struggled with recall more when trying to retrieve the information in a state that is different from the time of encoding. This is a strength because it suggests that the findings of Carter and Cassaday's study are supported by multiple pieces of empirical evidence, highlighting the importance of context in memory recall. However, studies like these raise ethical concerns as the study encouraged people to become drunk and under the influence of substances which can lead to injury or even death even by accident. Also, the level of engagement from participants when under the influence of alcohol may not necessarily be genuine due to the way it affects people's willingness to give honest responses. Some participants may have deliberately done poorly in some situations or try harder in others due to how alcohol affects people in unpredictable ways. This is a limitation because it suggests that the results of the study may not accurately reflect true cognitive or behavioral responses, as the influence of alcohol could skew participants' engagement and honesty. A limitation of Carter and Cassaday's study is that the study lacks mundane realism. The task of learning and recalling a list of words on drugs is an artificial task, which is a task that people don't typically encounter in their everyday lives and does not mimic how people typically recall information in their everyday lives. The consequences of remembering these words is not important compared to the consequences that a person could face if they didn't remember a piece of information in their day-to-day lives, as people are usually tasked with remembering more meaningful and contextually relevant information, e.g. medical or health information, emergency procedures, paying the bills, people's addresses or names, deadlines for work or education. This is a limitation because it suggests that the findings may not be applicable to real-life situations where memory retrieval is critical. Retrieval failure has several strengths and limitations. A strength of retrieval failure as an explanation of forgetting is that it has real-world practical applications. Retrieval failure can have practical implications in clinical psychology, education, and in particular in the context and search for missing people and reconstructing their last known whereabouts. This was used to aid in the conviction of Danielle Jones' killer, as a reconstruction in 2001 prompted witnesses to recall her arguing with a man, which later led to the conviction of her uncle through witness testimony. This has also helped the police in cognitive interviews, where people recall information for witness testimonies to recall every detail and think about the context of the crime, e.g. the weather. The idea is to increase recall by recreating the situation it was witnessed in. They have also asked witnesses to revisit the scene of a crime to prompt recall. This is a strength because it suggests that retrieval failure has significant implications for practical applications in various fields, particularly in enhancing the effectiveness of witness testimonies and aiding law enforcement. A strength of retrieval failure as an explanation of forgetting is that there is research to support retrieval failure having more validity than interference theory. Tulving and Sotka, 1971, showed how interference effects occurred due to the absence of any cues to aid retrieval. Participants were given word lists to remember, with one condition having category headings and another without. In conditions without category headings, fewer words were recalled than when headings were present, showing the information was available but simply unable to be accessed due to the absence of cues. This is a strength because it suggests that retrieval failure provides a more accurate explanation for forgetting than interference theory, as it highlights the critical role of cues in accessing stored information. The findings from Tulving and Sotka's research indicate that memory retrieval can be significantly enhanced by providing appropriate cues, reinforcing the idea that forgetting may often be a result of insufficient retrieval aids rather than the loss of information itself. A limitation of retrieval failure as an explanation of forgetting is that Tulving's encoding specificity principle is not falsifiable and therefore lacks scientific credibility. Baddeley, 1997, criticized the encoding specificity principle as impossible to test and verify for certain, making it unscientific. If a cue aids retrieval, then it could be argued to have been encoded in the memory. However, if it does not, then it could be argued that it wasn't encoded in memory as a cue. This is a limitation because it suggests that the encoding specificity principle may not provide a clear and testable framework for understanding memory retrieval. The lack of falsifiability means that it cannot be definitively proven or disproven, which undermines its scientific credibility and raises concerns about its reliability as an explanation for forgetting. This ambiguity can lead to confusion in interpreting research findings related to memory and retrieval processes. A limitation of retrieval failure as an explanation of forgetting is that the research used to support the explanation lacks ecological validity. Many studies investigating retrieval failure often use artificial tasks, such as word lists, which do not reflect real-life situations where memory retrieval occurs. In everyday life, memory is influenced by a variety of contextual factors, emotions, and social interactions that are not captured in controlled laboratory settings. This is a limitation because it suggests that the findings from research on retrieval failure may not generalize or accurately represent how memory functions in real-life situations. Thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more content like this. Bye.